Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about planning and zoning at the county level, and we have with us today Mike Hyde, who is the Community Development Director for Duchesne County, and Don Sargent, his neighbor over in Summit County with the same title. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate you taking time out to talk to us. Let's talk a little bit about what kinds of misconceptions people have about planning and zoning as far as that goes. What's the number one way in which people come in and they think you're going to be able to do something different than you're doing?
Well, there's several, Chad, that come up. Probably the number one we see in Summit County is someone comes in and with a building permit application, figuring everything's just right based on what a real estate agent has represented, and they find out that that lot may not be developable or buildable. And so they run into a snag, which is really unfortunate because when a homeowner is at that level of building a house, they're very excited. They put out a lot of money, investment to do it, and they come in and then the county says, no, you got to stop, you got to wait, you have to go through another process to get the lot eligible to build. Very frustrating for them, and so that's probably the one thing we see quite a bit.
Now, is there ever a case where you just can't get that building project done and just say, I'm sorry, you're out, you've got to sell your property, or
There has been a few occasions when that has occurred, and that really gets to a frustrating level.
I would say it's beyond frustrating.
Beyond,
myself.
yes.
What kind of problems do you see, Mike?
Well, sometimes people will they'll buy property not knowing that it maybe has no legal access to it. They may not know that it's not suitable for a future septic system due to groundwater or solid rock on the property. Sometimes they even try to build without a building permit, thinking that they're out in the middle of nowhere and no one's going to catch me. I'll try to build this without a permit. And so sometimes that creates a problem too.
So the issues that face you as county planning and zoning people are probably, while they're still the same, they are different because you have different things that come into consideration. And that was a good example right there, septic systems. You know, most people are on sewers in cities, as they don't think about septics. But what are some of the other interfaces that they have to deal with or that becomes a challenge for county planning and zoning?
Yeah, the septic system is a good one. We have a lot of properties in our county that were divided off back in the 1960s, 1970s, and they're only about a fifth of an acre in size, some of them, and that's way too small for a wastewater disposal system. So if a person has a lot that small, oftentimes they'll have to assemble maybe 5 or 6 of those lots to have an area big enough for a wastewater disposal system. And they may come to us not realizing that and run into those type of regulations with the health department and the county before they can build on the property.
How do people get to that point? In other words, you know, if somebody comes in and subdivides a lot, what's to warn them that there's that problem? You know, in other words, you know, subdivisions or putting parcels out there and titling them differently. I mean.
Well, as Don said, you know, you deal with a realtor typically when you're buying the property, but you need to go one step farther, and that is to actually visit your county planning department and find out the status of the property you're looking at, find out if it was legally subdivided, if it has legal access to it, if it's big enough for a wastewater disposal system, or if it's zoned properly for what you have in mind for the property.
See, now I would have come to the conclusion that you could, you know, if there was a recorded deed for the piece of property, it's all legit. There's the deed, but that's not the case.
A lot of times people will say that very same thing. Well, I have a recorded deed to the property. However, the county recorders will accept a deed for a property as long as it's properly signed and notarized, has a legal description. And sometimes people do or don't visit our offices before those recordings are done. When they don't visit our office, that's when they get that unpleasant surprise when they come in for a building permit.
What are some of the other things that just make your job more difficult with the public?
Well, I think it's a representation of the county with respect to what land is zoned for and with respect to development. And in Summit County, as I think any other county or jurisdiction, property rights is a big one. As if someone feels that they've owned the land through many generations of their family, they should have the right to do anything they want with it. And we find that very interesting in Summit County, where we're undergoing now some new general plan amendments, some rezoning, and we've had a lot of these landowners together in neighborhood workshops, and we've talked about the conflict between property rights and zoning. And on one occasion, there were two landowners that happened to be neighbors sitting next to each other in one of these sessions. One was saying, I should have that opportunity to do anything I want with my land. If I want to build an apartment complex right here on this field, on the map we had on the table, I should be able to do it. And the neighbor, the adjacent landowner, said, well, wait just a minute, John. I don't want that next to me. And so they really don't understand sometimes that use is a big factor when it comes to community values on what happens on one side of the property line and what happens on your side of the property line. And so we try all the time, and I know Mike does too in Duchesne, is balance property rights with good planning and zoning.
And is that successful?
Well, you start off with a general plan for the county in which the elected officials and the public and the appointed planning commission and the staff look at a vision for the county and try to look at the needs of the citizens. They develop some policies and some implementation ordinances and programs to help get to that point that the elected officials identify. And if the public participates in that process and buys into the plans, then it's more successful than if they don't.
How much is not in my backyard a problem for you guys?
All the time. Yeah. We see that all the time, particularly with residents moving into the area. They come to Summit County, particularly near the Park City boundary, and say, I finally made it to Park City, I finally afforded one of these lots, and glad to be here. And then at that point, you know, the gates need to shut, the drawbridge needs to be pulled up, and we're done. And so we see that quite often in most projects that come through.
Do you have a different scenario in Duchesne?
Well, you know, some of the typical NIMBYs we see are things that create noise or dust or odor. Out there, where we're the #1 oil producing county in the state, we have a lot of oil wells being drilled now that the price of oil is up there pretty high. And a lot of people that buy recreational land out in Duchesne County don't like to see these oil wells showing up next door. And also these oil wells require a lot of gravel for new roads and well pads, so a lot of gravel pits. And those create, you know, with the gravel rock crushing, noise and dust, and those are typical NIMBYs too that we deal with.
I can imagine. One last thing I want to talk about here is that counties seem to have more of a problem than cities with dealing with the edge of the frontier, so to speak. In other words, you've got that urban / wildlands interface, and you both have counties that have a lot of that interface going on.
do.
What kind of problems does that create, or what kind of restrictions or arguments does that bring?
Well, we have you know, a program in place where we've gone through analysis of the wildland interface areas to try to determine where that boundary is, where it makes sense to require more development standards on this side of the line versus the other side of the line, where it gets more sensitive to wildfire and other critical impacts. So we have that map now, which is really helpful, and that's taken some time to get there. And then we have the jurisdiction of the wildland fire district that helps us coordinate what happens on one side of the line or the other.
That Wildland Urban Interface Code has been around now for about 5 years, I think, when the county started adopting it, and it requires adequate access roads into cabins and second homes out in the countryside for fire trucks, addressing signs so we know where people are, the creation of a defensible space around a building so they have a better chance of saving it in the event of a fire.
Are there real objections to that? I mean, are people still going, I'm going to have to do this, blah, blah, blah?
Well, sometimes the objection is the guy down the road a little bit doesn't have to do that. Well, you know, he built maybe 10 years ago when those codes weren't in effect. But I think when they realize, that they see the headlines around the country of people losing their homes in wildfires, and they realize that it's for their own good to protect themselves in the event of a fire. And out here we get a lot of lightning-caused fires, and in these county areas there's not a lot of fire hydrants and water supply around, so you know, they come to understand that, and
I'd be putting in my own well and pumper myself. Anyway, stay with us. We'll be back with more of the county seat. We're talking about planning and zoning today at the county level, and we'll have wrap-up comments in just a minute.
How would you spend an extra day in Utah Valley? Stay one more day. Visit utahvalley.com to make reservations. Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
What is play? Is it culture? Is it adventure? Is it...
Ooh, it's a destination.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's correct.
Cedar City and Bryan Head Resort in the heart of Iron County, where outdoor excitement, culture, and the iron industry melts together. Come and forge a new adventure where play is the thing. You haven't forgotten how to play. It's just that you haven't been to the right place yet.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
It's time you got off the beaten path. It's time you discovered something new. It's time you explored Kane County, Utah. Thousands of miles of trails, shorelines that go on forever, a horizon that compels you forward. Spend some time in Kane County and visit the past, present, and future. Kane County, Utah. It'll be time well spent.